So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Damon Rands. I am CEO and founder of Wolfberry Cyber Security. There's me in Lego form, obviously. We're a company based in South Wales, but we have a number of offices in South Wales, and then we also have offices globally. We help businesses understand and protect against cyber risk. As it says on the slide, Wolfberry believes that cybersecurity is a process and not a product, and we act as our client's virtual cyber team to ensure that they have enterprise level cybersecurity support and at affordable cost. And that's really important to us. We've built up a number of services for organizations, from pen testing to vulnerability scanning to governance support. And it's really, really important, especially awareness training as well is really, really important to us. And we've been fortunate enough to win a number of awards over the last couple of years for the services that we provide. And most recently, we were identified by the Telegraph as one of the top 5 companies in the United Kingdom, which was really, really nice. And, you know, the team worked really hard. We're a team of 21 now, and, you know, we support clients of all sectors, of all sizes, in all different places all over the world. So really exciting time to be working in cybersecurity, and yeah, we love it. And we try to be slightly different, and a great example of that is our Surviving Ransomware website and resource that we've produced. So for any business globally, if they are hit by ransomware and have no protection against it, it can be a really difficult time. So we provide this service to any business of any size. We will help them recover from that ransomware. We will not charge them, because one of the things that is important to us as a company is we would never take advantage of an organization when they're on their knees. And trust me, we've seen so many companies struggling with this when they've been attacked, and, you know, their systems are completely ground to a halt. You know, we would never want to be seen as that organization that is taking advantage of them at that point. Well, not even taking advantage, but making money from it. It's almost like a double hit, right, for organizations. So for us, it's really important. It's a resource that we manage. And as I said, we help companies all over the world when they get hit. So as an organization, it's super important for us to help businesses understand their cyber threat and cyber risk, and then help develop defenses against that. We're going to talk a little bit about stats, because they are absolutely everywhere. And it's really interesting to see how businesses interact with them. I personally think 99% of the stats will wash over people's heads. You know, I mean, businesses, if you look at the stats we have on the screen here, they don't really make any sense and no context on their own, right? But then if we look at others, like businesses who do online banking and charities, that's fine. We all know this. I don't think these type of stats are gonna make us concerned more about the cyber risk. In fact, you know, when we get to the more scary stats, we go 4,000 ransom attacks occur on an average day. Now, okay, that's fine. And these are all ingestible. This is all ingestible information. But, you know, what do they mean? I think most businesses now have almost become blind to these types of facts. I think they're very difficult to relate to, especially as we get to the more crazy stats. Now, I will say that there's things like the 91% of breaches start with an email, right? So that type of stat is really interesting, because that informs you of the type of threats that you do face. You know, phishing emails we see all the time, and it is true. Most stats for the last year range from 80% to 90% to 91% of all breaches are started with a phishing email. So, you know, that is maybe a usable stat, but security breaches have increased by 67% over the last 5 years. What does that really mean? What does that mean to you? And then you get the more wild things, and then you get these type of stats, which I just think absolutely, you know, they don't bear any relation to most businesses working day in, day out. You know, 16.4 billion is lost a day to cybercrime, right? 684 million per hour, 11 million per minute. I mean, that doesn't affect me as a business, and I don't think it would affect most businesses. We all know at this point that cyber risk is a problem, and that it can cause damage. We've seen that, and we've known that in the public psyche, in the mainstream, I suppose, since WannaCry in 2017, I think. And we've known that for a while. But, viruses, PC viruses have been around since 1986 now. So we've been living with this threat for a long time, but we know now, I think, in the general public, when you wake up in the morning, it was a day or two ago now, and that iPhone had been breached by the NSO group in Israel. This is the world that we live in now, so that's on the main news, whereas the information in years and years ago wouldn't have hit us. We wouldn't have seen it. So we see these stats and we know that everybody knows it's a cyber risk, but it's all completely irrelevant, all of them, right? All we really, really worry about, and what you need to worry about as an organization, as an individual, is what does cyber risk really mean for your organization? And that is the crux, right? That is the most important thing. But what stops organizations engaging in cybersecurity, improving their cybersecurity? There are still a number of organizations and individuals who work within the organizations who think cyber risk is irrelevant. Nobody's interested in us. Nobody's going to touch us. We are completely, under the radar, and nobody's interested. And it's a point of view. It's not one that I agree with, because, like anything, you can. The WannaCry attack, in 2017 was not targeted. It was just spread. It did affect the NHS in the UK, but it spread globally and was just in the wild. It wasn't a targeted attack, and you could be an organization that accidentally gets hit in a targeted in a scattergun approach attack. But one of the major problems for organizations that even want to get, become more cybersecure, to improve the cyber hygiene within their organization, one of the key problems is the jargon, is understanding and breaking through that. But one thing I want to say, and it's probably the most important thing of all, is knowledge is power, right? And I don't mean technical knowledge. It's not about we can strip away all the veneers from cybersecurity, and at the end of the day, it's all about how your company operates, how your organization operates. It's so important, and that understanding. And let's be honest, nobody understands your company better than you do. And that is so powerful. It is so important, and hopefully will become more apparent as we go further into this conversation now. What are the principles of cybersecurity? We should all start with a couple of things, right? A couple of key points. The first being your data. What data do you hold as an organization? Again, it's completely irrelevant whether you're a 5-person company, a 25-person company, or a 2,500, 250,000 person company. Yes, the data increases, and the silos where that data is held increases, but you still should go through the same process as an organization. So you have data, and it can be in multiple locations. You can have it on workstations. You can have it in the cloud with providers such as Google or Office 365, or you can have it in web applications, or you can have it in physical servers, because lots of people still use physical file servers, right? But you have to identify where all your data is, and then once you identify all your data, then you can understand where your sensitive data, your crucial, your critical, system critical data, the type of information that you wouldn't want printed out and left in a car park somewhere. It's really important. That type of data is the data that you really need to protect. Once you understand that, then you can look at the processes around that data. How is that data used? And this is really important as well. This is your critical functions, your critical pathways to that data. What are the services that, if they were disrupted in any way, or they were broken by a breach or a cyber hack, what would that mean for your organization? So understanding the data and the processes around it. And once you understand the processes, you can understand the web applications that access the data via the processes. And now it might not just be web applications, it could be normal applications as well. It could be your accounting package, it could be a HR system, it could be anything that you use. Really important understanding all those different types of applications that use that data and create their processes to do it. And then finally then is the users around the system as well. Who uses, how do they use the web applications and the processes to manipulate the data? All important and all worth understanding. And then basically, once you understand your core processes and how it manipulates the data within the organization, you can wrap appropriate controls around it. And you're around everything that's crucial and critical. And that really is the principles of cybersecurity. And if you think of GDPR always says, one of the tenets of GDPR is identify critical data and wrap appropriate controls around it. And this is how you size and you wrap appropriate controls around it. You as users and people within your own organization understand what data you have, the processes, and everything else way better than anybody else. So it's really important to understand that. There's no jargon needed for any of this. There's no worry about anything, because all you're trying to do is understand at a technology level, I suppose, how you use and store your data. So it's really, really important. Some of the common mistakes that organizations make is, firstly, they don't do the stage that we just discussed, right? They just jump straight in. But and I appreciate you'll have a lot of organizations who worry about cybersecurity. They see the news, they know that they could become a threat, but they don't know where to turn. So they know that they need to improve their cybersecurity. It keeps them up at night. They know that they need to take steps. They need to do things to make their systems and their employees and everything else more secure. But so many have no idea where to turn. And so many turn to their IT provider, whether that's internal IT or an external IT resource. Cybersecurity has never been an IT issue. It's a business issue. As I showed you on the slide previously, it's understanding the whole, the process, the data, the users, the applications, absolutely everything. It goes outside of IT. IT is a tool that is used to manipulate that data. And it's so much more important that you understand the outside, outside of that scope. And unfortunately, IT providers will rely on solutions, and that's really where the key problem starts for organizations. They'll look at a solution that they need a firewall, or they need to upgrade their file server, or they need to change to the latest version of an operating system. And sometimes that can be the case. Those things need to be done, but quite often it's not. It's just that lack of understanding from the client and from the IT provider. And probably the best example I can give was an accountancy firm. And we were asked to engage and provide a review of their systems. And what we found was we were engaged with them. They'd spent a whole lot of money on building a disaster recovery site. Basically, it was an area that duplicated everything that they had internally, that if the main office, the main building was to fail in any way, everybody would be able to switch over and would operate fine, which is great. Okay, that is no problem. And do you know what? Probably 10 years ago, that would have been a fantastic solution, but they spent a lot of money. But we were working with them. Very quickly, we discovered that in fact, everything that they did was now in the cloud. And basically, it was just, an old school approach to working for that client. As I said, 10 years ago, that would have been a great solution, but it was totally irrelevant. It was not needed, and they could have used that investment in another way. But because the IT and the company themselves didn't really get to grips and understand how the company was operating, how the company worked, they wasted a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort, really, for no benefit, other than Active Directory. It was probably the best example I've seen in a long time, really, of taking the missteps and going in the wrong direction. So really, we do see organizations, when they don't know where to start, they turn to vendors, they turn to solutions. And one thing it's worth saying is there is no silver bullet for this, right? Cybersecurity, as I said right at the beginning, is a process and not a product. Products are needed completely, but once you understand the process, the products can be applied properly. So it's a really important step, really important thing to understand. So we see businesses taking missteps all the time by taking that approach. And ideally, there are resources available, there are other services available that can help businesses understand, the type of steps they need to take, what they need to do really to move to the next stage and improve their understanding. One of the major things that we see for businesses these days is who does what, understanding what organization does what for them. Now, even the smallest of organizations has multiple businesses involved supporting them these days. So if I give you this rather complex sort of diagram, as you can see, we've got a client here, they've got data in a couple of locations, they've got groups of users in different locations, they've got different applications. I've got web apps on there, but they could be internal applications, they could be anything, but they're hosted, they could be internal. And then we've got the processes that map and manage all of those. Now, this is totally not uncommon at all. So we could have an external IT provider is managing and helping on a number of resources, right? So it's looking after some set of data and a group of users. And at that point, they're affecting or using a certain number of processes to do that. Then you'll see web applications or applications, very similar thing. They're manipulating maybe a different set of data, or it could be the same set of data using a different set of processes or the same set. And then obviously the ultimately managing and looking after a web application or application. And that could be anything from payroll, it could be HR, it could be a buying system, it could be absolutely anything. And, most companies these days use so many different tools, everything is in the cloud. Once that data is in the cloud, it's still your responsibility. We have to make sure as businesses, and even Wolfberry, we do go through exactly the same process of when we choose to take some of our data and to manage that or host it in a cloud provider or a cloud service, we have to do the due diligence to make sure that that data is going to be secure and safe in the location it is, because it's our responsibility, it's our data, and we have to make sure it's safe where it is. So it's important. So at the moment, you can see the diagram. Then we've got external IT doing some stuff, we've got app providers doing some other bits, all manipulating different processes and managing different areas. And then we'll have maybe an internal IT provider your internal IT or a different IT provider or whoever managing other parts of the network. And as you can see, so all of a sudden now the data, we've got different parties managing the data. We've got three different parties affecting processes. We've got different partners managing users, different partners affecting web applications. So where we see this happen so many times is that the different providers do not talk to each other. External IT thinks internal IT may be patching the users, where internal IT thinks external IT is patching the users. App providers think that the external IT or the internal IT are managing the infrastructure that the systems are hosted on. It happens all the time. We see these holes arise where systems are not patched or not looked after properly because other people think somebody else is taking care of it. A great example of it is the TalkTalk hack from years and years ago, it was, Tiscali. Was it Tiscali? I think it was Tiscali. TalkTalk had purchased Tiscali. Forgive me if that's wrong, but I'm sure it was Tiscali. They purchased Tiscali. They hosted their servers internally, but everybody just forgot about them. They thought that they were still being managed by somebody else. They were left unpatched. And unfortunately, that's how the hack started for those guys. So you see these systems that drop through the holes. And, it's impossible for one organization these days to be supported by one provider because, we all use Microsoft products. We all use Google products. We all use different HR, different payroll systems, different accountancy packages. And all of these host our data and are spread globally these days. I mean, geography doesn't even come into this sometimes, even with the user base, right? One of the things that the pandemic taught us is that users really don't need to be living in, a commutable distance anymore. They can be global. So that introduces its own set of problems as well. Understanding the roles is really, really important. And we see so many organizations that fail and fall through because of this. So that's really important to understand as well. One of the things that we probably see happen the most is oversizing. Now, if you haven't taken the steps to understand your requirements by understanding your data, the processes and everything else that run around it, then you risk it oversizing. Maybe not only are you wasting money, you are then, introducing other vulnerabilities to your system that are completely unnecessary. I'll explain what I mean more now. So, for example, you see the Draytech router. Great, an organization needs a router, and the IT provider gives them a Draytech router, which is fantastic, no problem. A really good product. Lots and lots of organizations use it as a router. But the thing is, it's got a whole bunch of other functionality attached to it. And we see so many organizations will buy the router, they'll plug it in. And for those who don't know, a router just provides internet access to their network. They plug it in, they get internet access, they're happy. The router just sits there then, which is fine. And it's only ever turned off, turned back on when the internet goes down. But they only wanted a router, but this has got Wi-Fi on it as well. And quite often we see people plug it in, leave the Wi-Fi enabled. The Wi-Fi credentials will be on the bottom of the router, the username, the password, the access to it. And it'll just be left with all this other functionality that's unused. If you want it for the Wi-Fi as well, then that's fantastic. But if you've already got a Wi-Fi solution installed, which so many organizations have these days, they have now diverged and they separated into their own sort of areas, with Meraki and Ubiquiti and all these other solutions, mesh networks, that Wi-Fi is not that important anymore on a router, So it's really important to understand exactly what you need. And many organizations don't do that. And then maybe another example is an organization needs a firewall. So you can see from this image here, this is Fortinet firewalls, fantastic products. And they range from not that expensive to incredibly expensive. Which is the right firewall for your organization? Do you just go from the recommendation of your IT provider, or do you have a set of recommendations that are needed? Now, 99% of the time, it'll be based on price rather than functionality, and it'll be given on the advice of your IT provider. Now, the problem with that is, you could go for an underpowered one, but believe it or not, an underpowered one maybe isn't as bad as spending a lot of money on a bigger, more efficient firewall, and again, if the board or the company owner sanctions that's fantastic that they're investing in technology, because that is really, really important. But you could go for the higher end firewall, but only use 5% of its capabilities. It might be just something specific that you need it for. And then you have all this other functionality that's wrapped around it that is just unused. And that's where the problem begins, because As long as it's doing the 5% that you want, that other 95% of capability is left in a default state. And defaults can cause problems on networks, right? So default usernames, default configurations, hackers and cyber criminals are able to exploit those things. And once a firewall's plugged in, we only tend to upgrade them when they don't work anymore, right? Or they become end of life. So that fact is that you have 95% of this technology is being unused and is just left in its default state, can introduce huge vulnerabilities within an organization. You see it, and we've seen it for a long, long time with printers, multifunction printers. They're introduced into organizations. They punch holes left, right, and center into the network, especially a few years ago. They were an absolute nightmare, and people were able to access the networks remotely through the printers and all these other bits and pieces. Now, thankfully, the production of these devices, these multifunction printers and so on, has improved greatly, and the security inside them has improved as well. But that sizing and understanding of the capability of the device that you're plugging into the network is so important. So it's worth sizing it. You could say that there's an expectation that you make an investment in the more expensive firewall because that there's going to be growth. You might want it to be able to link to different locations, and you're going to be introducing new locations over the next few years. Absolutely get that. That's fantastic. That's foresight. I totally on board with that. But at least you're knowing then what the capabilities are, and then you're able to manage the capabilities, shut them down, block them, change the defaults, and you're just aware of the risk of having that. And that's all cybersecurity should ever be, is understanding that part. So really, really important, understanding the choices that you make. And then my favorite one, because we see this so many times, so many organizations, as I mentioned earlier, still today buy physical file servers, they put them on their networks. Now, by far, probably the most popular on the planet is Dell PowerEdge servers, great file servers, workhorses, and so many organizations have used them for so many years. Now, what lots and lots and lots of people do not realize, and people who work in IT, is they come with something called Open Manage. And it's a resource that sits on the server outside of the operating system. So if you're running Windows Server or you're running virtualized systems and everything else, it sits outside of that and allows an IT technician to be able to access the configuration of the server, to be able to change the way the disks that store the data, you blank them, remove them, do whatever you want to reconfigure them. So we see so many organizations that just install the file server, have no idea that it's there, that capability is there, and just leave it with the default credentials of root and Calvin. So many times we've seen this, and it just opens up, lots of them have remote access configuration as well that gets enabled, but it's more often that it's a risk internally within your organization. But if you have a disgruntled employee, it would be nothing for them to be able just to scoot across to the server on the network, log in, and wipe all the data off your system. So it's really, really scary, easily understood if you know the capabilities of the server that you're installing into that network. You make the choice, make the decisions to understand the equipment that you have. It's the same with UPS routers, uninterruptible power supplies as well. APC being a great example. These things these days have interfaces that you can log into, like printers, and they have functionality that is enabled by default that can cause lots of problems. Like you can remotely turn off an uninterruptible power supply, which will turn off all your file servers and your technology within your office. Really important stuff, right? So understanding and sizing correctly the technology that you use as an organization, whether you're a two-man company or whether you're a 25,000-man company, is so important. And having that insight and understanding is really important. And it goes all the way back to understanding the data, the processes, and how those interact and are manipulated. Really important. So what should you do? Well, how do you gain the knowledge? For us, and I think for most organizations, running a cyber audit is probably key. So use industry standards. So we use the recover, identify, protect, detect, respond process. And we recommend that every organization goes through this. It's so important. It gives you great understanding. So under recover, recovery planning, improvements, communications, understanding if things go wrong, what to do. The same with identify, and identify is probably one of the keys, especially for us as an organization when we help businesses, is asset management. And asset management comes into two parts: physical and informational. And that is, what information do you hold, where's it stored, and how is it then manipulated? Understanding. And really the identify stage is that understanding the data, the processes, and everything else around it. And it allows an organization to understand the risk. And risk assessments are important, right? And there is no right or wrong answer. You can be cavalier with risk, and businesses choose to be that way. And that's fine, because at the end of the day, I suppose, it might not be something that I would agree on how I would run my company, but everybody's appetite for risk is different. And that's important to understand. And that phase is really, really important. So we always encourage that. Once you've identified it, again, if you remember, we said identify the data, the processes, and how it's manipulated. You can then move on to protect, which is really important, right? Apply in the appropriate controls, access controls, who can access what, awareness training, encouraging staff to understand the risks. Because with awareness training, as I mentioned, I'm going to pull back a stat, even though I moaned about them earlier, the phishing issue, right? Between 80 and 90% of all breaches in the last 12 months started with a phishing attack. Understanding what to do, how to identify them is key. The threats do change all the time. Again, I refer to the NSO group and what they've done recently with the iPhones, well, what's come to light recently with the iPhones is really, really important. Understanding how that affects your organization. Going back to the fact that you've got an asset management, you know what devices are in your organization, and then you know what steps to take to protect them. All really, really important. All merges into one, really, at that point. And then you can move to detect, and detect becomes a really important phase. Some organizations need constant monitoring, constant activity. Now, I don't think, I would like to think most organizations don't need the constant monitoring, because there is a cost, there's an overhead and a financial cost to doing that. But most organizations will probably just need, regular updates, regular understanding of where they are, and the protection and the detection of vulnerabilities that exist on their network. So that's really important to understand as well. And then respond, response planning, knowing what to do when things go wrong. But as you go through that process of identify, protect, and detect, it gives you that idea of what you need to do, where you need to concentrate, because you've identified your critical paths for your processes and your data. Gives you the ability to understand of what you need to do to protect. So it is so important to provide the knowledge and the understanding. So it's a step that we always recommend businesses take. So what does that mean in real terms for an organization? We take those 5 stages. Well, quite often it'll split between a technical review and a governance review. And a technical review, if I take you through a typical exercise for that, will be, what external resources do you have as an organization? So websites, other resources where you store your business data. So again, HR or payroll information and so on. Where is all that data stored? Is it secure? Is it safe? So you'd look to test that with something like a penetration test. Now, a penetration test is, as I mentioned, the jargon earlier, we do see, unfortunately, we see it within our industry, the interchangeable terms that are nowhere near the same thing. So quite often we'll see organizations saying, well, we've had a penetration test of this system. And then when you look at the output, you look at the information, in fact, it was only a vulnerability scan. And they are two completely things that are used. And this is worth commenting on, really, that are used interchangeably. So if I can explain very quickly, a penetration test typically splits into three sections for us. So the first section would be when we are testing, say, a web application, it would be a bit of open source intelligence, which would mean looking at Google, looking at other different things, researching the target, understanding the target, and so on. The next stage then would be a vulnerability scan. Now, this would we would use a standard package that would run an automated review of that target, and it would identify maybe vulnerabilities in the versions of the software that are being used or the operating system or anything, right? And we'll use that information then combined with stage one as well to then perform a physical penetration test as stage three. Now that's where our testers would try to exploit the information we've identified in the first two stages. Whereas a vulnerability scan is just purely stage two, and it's just an automated test with very little human interpretation involved in it. And we see that happen quite a lot. We see organizations think they're having a pen test, but they only really get a vulnerability scan. And they're, like I said, two completely different beasts. But as part of the technical review, you would take your organization, you would review the web applications that you use, and then any external public facing touch points that you have. So that point where your company breaks out to the internet through the router, you maybe have a number of locations, you maybe have a range of IP addresses, so that touch with the internet. All of these need to be reviewed and tested to see what the vulnerabilities are. We have so many organizations who have a number of public IP addresses that have no idea what exists on them. That's called shadow IT. And you'll see that internally within the organization as well, where people will plug devices into the network without authority or authorization. And then they open holes into the network. So really important that you get that understanding. So a thorough external review of the organization should be conducted. And then an internal test as well. So very similar to the external penetration test, an internal review, health check should be performed, understanding, is the network fit for purpose? Is it one big flat network that everybody can see every resource on that network? For some organizations, that might be a completely relevant approach, but for most, segmenting that network should be probably advisable. But all of that is reviewed as part of the technical review. What is the organization's vulnerability to phishing? I know I keep mentioning phishing because it is such an important area, but what is the vulnerability to phishing? That should be conducted over a series of exercises, because it's key to understand how the company defends, the automated services defend, and then the end users, bless them, who can cause havoc by clicking on links. So that's really a worthwhile exercise to test as well. And then from a governance point of view, it's understanding the culture within the organization, because it will always come from top down. How important is cybersecurity? Are you working as an organization to any frameworks at all, from ISO 27001, maybe to IASME governance? Have you looked at Cyber Essentials standard? Where are you against that? All of these different standards. And what you would expect the cyber audit to produce then is a report that highlights everything that you're doing well, because that's important to know, right? But also highlights things that probably need improving, areas that need to focus, to bring focus to. And that's key for organizations. And a good cyber audit shouldn't be, throwing people under the bus, because basically what we're trying to do is trying to build a culture within an organization of cyber improvement. So everybody's on board and everybody understands what they need to do to improve the cyber hygiene within an organization. And then, once you've gone through the cyber audit, you should be left with a clear roadmap of what you have and what you need to do. But that then sets you on the road to cyber enlightenment, which is somewhere that we all want to be. And once you've done that, then when it comes to all the devices that you need to purchase, you can size them correctly. You understand everything that you want. You're able to make the right choices. And that is key. Cybersecurity should be, and I've always said this, cybersecurity should be an IT enabler, right? Because it should clear the bottlenecks. It should provide clear guidance of how to operate your organization efficiently and securely. It should allow you to deduplicate data. We see so many organizations when we do cyber audits with organizations, we see so many of them that duplicate data in, the same information in different locations. And that's fine, I suppose, but that storage comes at a cost every time. So if we can deduplicate data, we can reduce the footprint of the organization. Reducing the footprint of the organization reduces the amount of controls that are needed. And it's really so important for businesses to understand that simple process. And, it should allow then a more efficient and more secure way for a business to operate, no matter if they are geographically separated. As long as we've got a hold on of what we have, where it is, and how is it being used is so important. You can make the choice of what is the correct Fortinet firewall to purchase, and you can make the right choice of what router that you need, and you can choose the right choices and the right configuration settings, because you're doing all these processes now. You're detecting, you're understanding your vulnerabilities within your organization. You have that clear understanding of everything, and it's a really simple process. It's not complicated. I appreciate that the larger the client becomes, the more complex the IT infrastructure can become, but that there's more resource, and there's so many ways that businesses can be helped to improve their understanding. And there's so many great companies out there that can help, and so many organizations that can help. And that's what we would strongly recommend. So I think really for me, I think that's everything that I needed to say, and it covers off some of the most common mistakes that almost all businesses take, or make, I should say. It's really important that businesses do take that step. We all know, we all go to bed at night knowing the risk of cyber at the moment. So all the fear mongering and all the doom and gloom that we see so many organizations try to promote cybersecurity on is not needed. Everybody knows that cyber is a risk and that we need to take steps to protect it. What we need to do, though, is to provide a safe sort of environment, or as we say, a safe environment that businesses can take those steps, and feel secure in the steps that they're taking to make sure that they're moving in the right direction when it comes to cybersecurity. So thank you.